Hey guys, before I begin, I want to give a shout out to a young woman who I admire very much. I'm not going to give her name because of the nature of the attacks against me, against a lot of us. The harassment, the doxing, the threats. I won't say her name, but it is to her that credit goes for naming this series. My friend and her husband have a great marriage. They are both great parents to their babies, and they both work hard. They have really good careers too to support their family well. And on top of it all, my friend is a roller derby star. No kidding. You wouldn't guess it, really, by looking at her. Though she does appear to be an athlete, I don't know, you just maybe would think that she's a softball player or something. I don't know, how often does the idea of roller derby come to your head, right? Well, yesterday I was telling her the update on the attacks against me, the harassment, the doxing, the threats. And I told her that I plan to start at the beginning since we still have so many unanswered questions. And I asked her for ideas on a name for this series. And, she's pretty sharp-witted. Of course, she came up with a few that were really funny. But then I said, when you're skating and they're coming up beside you and you go like this, and then I did my elbow kind of like, to hold them back. And she laughed and she said, "Oh, that's called a gut check." So let's get started with part 2 of the series that my roller derby friend has titled for us, Gut Check. In this video, I want to talk about the false narrative that we were being told soon, very soon after the case of Christopher Watts first hit the headline news. Remember? A nurse? A retired nurse? No, she was never a nurse. An employee of a multi-billion-dollar company? No, she wasn't. A high-level executive? No, she wasn't. A stay-at-home mom? But weren't both kids in daycare? We would learn later on that not only were both children in daycare, but that instead of picking the kids up at the end of the day, that job was left for Christopher Watts. He worked all day, we learned, then he drove his work truck home, picked up his car, drove to the daycare center, picked up the children, then brought them home, and they were put to bed every night at 6:30 in the evening. We were told that Christopher Watts' wife was a successful employee, but in fact, she was a promoter of many product-based multi-level marketing products. That is not an employee. We were told that Christopher Watts' wife earned the car, but then later we learned it was actually a leased vehicle in Christopher Watts' name. We did learn that if her orders were high enough, then she might get some sort of bonus to help her pay for the lease payment. Oh, remember those stories that we learned right after the case hit the headline news? Remember we were told that Christopher Watts was running around having casual and rather kinky, you know, with total strangers. Remember that? How it was all over the news, all over social media too, how he was some kind of kinky weirdo who was meeting up with a bunch of other kinky weirdos and they were doinking. Well, it turns out that those stories weren't true at all. And now we're told that one of the people who gave interviews, she actually gave interviews, giving all sorts of details about how the doinking went. Well, it turns out she was actually a friend of Christopher Watts' wife. Early on in the discussion groups, opinions were varied, which of course is what a discussion is all about, right? I would say opinions were split about half and half down the middle between people who believed Christopher Watts was a monster who murdered his children and those who believed he was covering for his wife. When the attack started, people scurried fast to private groups to continue the discussion. And my hunch is the number of people discussing this case who believe it is reasonable to believe that Christopher Watts was telling the truth when he said he did not murder his children, well, I think that number is actually growing. I want to be clear that regardless of whatever your opinion is on this case, or on any other true crime cases that we're discussing, that you are welcome to take part in the discussion. We have just a couple of rules here. Talk about the cases, not about each other. And if you can articulate your opinions without using profanity, then that's a good thing. We do not and we will not tolerate harassment on this channel. So if you show up here to harass us, then you will be blocked, regardless of who you are or who you claim to be. If you're not familiar with the details of this case or of the long history of the attacks, the harassment, the doxing, the threats against us for simply discussing this case, then you can familiarize yourself with the details of the case by watching the videos and reading the Discovery Docs. And take a look at the Timeline series too. Watch the videos. Check out the video that shows Christopher Watts' wife spraying poor little Bella right in her precious little face and laughing and saying, "This is why we had kids." Watch the Whack-A-Daddy video when Bella started to cry. Watch the Santa Claus video if you can stand to watch it. That's what we did. We watched those videos searching for any clue whatsoever that Christopher Watts was abusive toward his wife and children. Soon after this case hit the headlines and the attacks started against many of us, people like me who have been writing on true crime cases where there has been family violence, or people like me who do speak on family violence and child abuse, or people like me who do openly discuss true crime cases on social media. Well, while we were watching those videos, searching for any clue whatsoever that Christopher Watts was an abuser, when the attacks started so soon after this case hit the headline news, combined with what we were noticing in those videos, we began to realize that somebody, or perhaps there were a few somebodies actually, that somebody surely seemed desperate to try to control the narrative on this case. Why? What is it about all of the information? What is it about all of the details of this case that we've been discussing that somebody or a few somebodies clearly do not want us to notice or to discuss? So I just want to say welcome to the discussion if you're new. try to become familiar with the case. I mean, you're free to ask us questions, but it's really better for you to like research the case on your own and then, offer your opinions and join the discussion. Because on this channel and in our Facebook groups too, we believe we have the right to discuss true crime cases on social media with or without permission from the attackers who have been trying to harm us, who have been harassing us, who have been doxing us, who have been committing slander and libel and defamation against us. We believe we have the right to discuss true crime cases on social media without being threatened and bullied and harassed. We believe we have the right to our privacy too, and the right to a peaceful existence, and the right to freely assemble on social media without interference from the attackers. Some actually claiming they're being paid, others claiming they were recruited by those who are claiming they're being paid. We have the right to discuss true crime cases and to form our own opinions on the cases we're discussing. Because in 2020, in the United States, we do have the right to think for ourselves.